Welcome back to the channel folks, and to another painting tutorial. Today's tutorial is going to feature 3D printed infantry, ski troops. But I've also been painting some more 3D printed vehicles. These ones are Polish. Everything from these half-tracks, trucks, camouflaged half-tracks, artillery tractors, twin turret, Vickers I think those are, and this funky looking thing. Definitely my favourite of the lot. It's almost like the kind of thing that you would, I don't know, go out and stay in as a caravan or something. But that's an artillery tractor. Now, might as well show you what paints I've been using for this. This is a set by Hataka. It's good for airbrushing, good for paintbrushing. I airbrushed all of these, and it works fine with ordinary Vallejo thinner. There's 4 paints in there, including a more pastel green that you cannot see in use here. But the main focus today is about these guys, 3D printed ski troops. Now, my impression previously from seeing photographs of completed work on social media is that infantry in the 3D printing world are horrible, dumpy, chunky looking things. But these guys, I think you'll agree, have got really good proportions. So I'm going to take you through how I prepped these and how I painted them. I should point out just now though, this is what I used for the snow. There are a great many different snow products out there. I'm not going to recommend this or any other one over the other. This is just what I've got, folks. You can decide yourself what snow you might want to go for. But there you go, folks. Let's see how I got on with these 3D printed Finnish ski troops. Let's start by sizing up these figures, folks. See if the proportions are good. The equipment they're carrying, how that looks compared to the rest of the figure. And I have to say, first impressions are very promising. Now, the uniforms they're wearing, they are quite baggy because they are snow suits over the top of uniforms, so you'd expect them to be quite chunky looking. And too chunky is the complaint I would most often give to 3D printed figures. But these guys, the chunkiness looks completely appropriate to what you'd expect from troops wearing ski covers on uniforms. The skis and the ski poles are also looking great, folks. Thin enough for practical use as wargame figures, and therefore in good proportion to the rest of the minis. And the rifles, the MGs and so on, they're all looking pretty good as well, folks. So overall, a great looking bunch of 3D printed figures that I'm looking forward to getting some paint on now. Before we do that, there is a bit of clean up, and I'm using a pair of good quality modelling snippers here to remove the little bits of support that is still on these figures here and there. I'm just clipping them off, using the knife a little bit, but that's a bit scary because this stuff is really quite fragile. So a snip is better than a cut, because the cut you're going to have to put quite a bit of force and tension into the piece, whereas a snip you can just cut it off where you need. Now, some of the supports are quite hard to get to right at their base. It's hard to remove them completely smooth, and some filing might be appropriate here, but some of these pieces, such as the ski poles, are so thin that I don't think they would survive any rough filing. So I'm just going to try and cut them as close as possible with the snippers. So let's get on with the painting. First thing I want to point out is I'm not painting these in the normal way, in as much as I've got them on their bases whilst I'm painting them. These guys are quite fragile, and I'm really scared that I'm going to clip off one of the really fine bits of detail, you know, like a ski pole or the end of a ski or the end of a rifle, in handling these. So I want them on the base, and I'm placing them in a way that they are entirely within the footprint of the base. Nothing sticking out to get brushed off, for instance, by a thumb, and there you go, you've got a tiny wee piece that you cannot glue back on. Doing it this way does present some issues. For instance, it's quite hard to work around all of the figures when they are on a base together. And secondly, from my own perspective, quite literally, I can find it hard to focus on a figure when I'm painting a small bit of detail if directly beyond that is another figure or two. That just screws up my eyes, so I prefer a nice clear background to the figures when I'm painting them. But this is a good practical solution to working with these fragile 3D prints. I painted the skis and the boots before I set them into the basing material and left them to dry overnight. That way I'm not going to mess up the base. It's going to look pristine as I need it to. Then I painted all the major undercoat colours, which is basically two in this case. It's going to be London Grey, and then for fabrics, skin and such like, German Camo black brown. Then it was on to the tricky business of painting white. White's a colour which can be challenging. It can be challenging because it's hard to shade it and it's hard to highlight it. But also it can be a paint which can end up going on quite dry and quite lumpy, as it quite often is semi-opaque when it's coming out of the bottle, which means you need to add lots of layers. And that's certainly the case when you are wanting shade colours underneath it in a layering approach as I'm taking. So it's hard sometimes to get a nice smooth finish. So I relied to a great extent on really light coloured greys. For instance, the main colour on the white snowsuit series is going to be deck tan. Then I'm going to highlight it with off-white, and that's going to be it. So we're going from London Grey through deck tan to off-white. Another brighter option is going to be starting with deck tan, then going to off-white, and then finishing with white. And you can also do a mixture of those two different approaches across the unit, and that will help break it up and show different ages in the uniform, different usage in the uniforms. And I've seen some nice pictures when I've been doing some Google searches where it's a proper mixed bag, even though they're all basically in white camo smocks. Anyway, back to the matter in hand. So I am layering on in my normal style, which is applying a coat of the next layer, in this case the deck tan, whilst leaving some of the shade colour, the base colour, in this case London Grey. And it's almost like painting lines, painting streaks across that surface. It's not all going to go down in a winner, folks. There's very few colours that will layer in just one coat, so take your time, follow these steps as I'm doing them, and it'll come out nice and smooth, and don't try to get a finished result in this first layer. So you can see we're creating a sort of map of the figure here, and this is going to help us in the next steps where we can start to create the contrasts by identifying the high points and the low points. Now we want to be careful here that we have soft transitions across the base colours here between the shade and the main coat. I don't want to take my normal really high contrast approach because we're dealing with something which is supposed to be white, so it shouldn't have too deep a shade. So I'm going to apply a glaze. So I'm using the deck tan to do this, folks, applying it as an extremely thin wash. Hopefully you're familiar with glazes and you know that it's not about creating a wash in the sense that you're going to be leaving the paint in the deep recesses. You want an even coverage all over, and that will help the transition from the London Grey to the deck tan overall. Now we're back to just the deck tan straight out the bottle and mixed on the palette as normal, and I'm going to start firming up the brighter areas, the areas that I want to be quite solid deck tan. And I've got the map already put down there from the initial couple of layers, so I'm ready to just paint lines in again, folks, but this time those lines are just going to firm up and come up out of the transition points. Be careful to leave some of the semi-opaque deck tan, so you've got a transition from the London grey with the glaze through semi-opaque deck tan up to the deck tan itself. And these figures are really quite small, 15mm figures are not big, so make sure you are using the right size brush. Make sure you've got the right mixture of paint as well, so it's flowing nicely off the brush. And once again, don't try to do this, even this final stage here of the main colours, don't try to get it on in one go. We're building up layers here, remember folks, so it's all part of the process. If you need to, then just let it dry and go back in and paint another layer in over the high point that you want to have the most opaque colour on it. Take your time and keep it smooth. Now we're ready for the highlight, and the highlight here is the thing that's really going to make the uniform pop, the thing that's going to bring the depth that we have painted into the layers, going to bring that depth out by giving an eye-catching highlight. And we're using off-white for this. We don't have to use pure white. Off-white is going to stand out strongly against the greyish background that we have created. And this is the first point at which I've actually even used white on these figures here, but you can see how we're getting a very white appearance to everything. I'm using an even smaller brush here, folks, for this point, because we really want to have thin lines, and you can see I really am just painting lines, but I'm following the map that we have created. Even if I can't keep it on camera, sorry about that folks. Follow the map we have created, putting this on the high points, and everything's coming up out of the shade, and we're getting the depth that we want while still creating an overall white look. I'm just going to let the video play a bit here, folks, so you can see how something dull and grey can become white and interesting. Next up is all the various equipment on these guys. Now I'm not going to spend a great deal of time showing you how I did this because it's just common to so many other of the guys I've got out there. The most important thing is how to get that white camo smock. Now there's going to be a little slideshow of pictures at the end of the video, folks, so you can have a look at these guys in a bit more detail. But that's me done really. If you want to see any more about how I would paint webbing or shoes or faces or so on, check the How to Paint Flames of War playlist. I've listed the colours down in the description, folks. That's colours for the camo smocks, skis and the ski poles. And of course you will find a link to the website where these were purchased from. Thanks for watching, folks. And thanks to all the subscribers who support the channel. If you'd like to support the channel and subscribe, please do so, because it will help us get this kind of content out to other people who enjoy this hobby. And if you hit the bell button, that means I'll definitely see you all on the next one.